What I found out from Yu-Gi-Oh's biggest event this season so far can actually change everything you know about Yu-Gi-Oh, especially if you're trying to win some games, whether it's against your friends or against some high-level players. And of course, big dog, there's a lot of information to go around, some concepts to debunk, and some theories that can really help improve your game to the next level. So stick to the end of the video where I reveal everything you need to know about Yu-Gi-Oh so far and tell you how the Yu-Gi-Oh meta is changing. YCS Brazil is the first major event that we've had for this 2024 season. And the crazy thing about it is that it is a 3v3 event, meaning that instead of one player playing against one, it's 3 players playing against 3. It actually gives us even more data than a standard usual event. Now, not only here is where my first theory comes in, I think once we start to get and look into the data, YCS Brazil proves it. In theory, we do not need a ban list to be able to fix the format because it's already healing itself. Dog, who am I kidding? It's Kamani here. They're gonna make a ban list regardless. As we go through the data analytics, I personally think that you'll lean more towards that side. But of course, if you do disagree, I can't wait to hear what you have to say and what you predict will be hit on the forbidden list. I'll be making mine soon as well. So YCS Brazil had 588 players or 196 teams. It's not necessarily big considering that's the start of the format, but it's pretty big considering that it's Brazil, and of course it is a team, meaning that you need to get 3 people to be able to compete. What I found really strange about the event is that Konami wouldn't stream day 1, but they would stream day 2. I mean, the hardware is already there to be able to do it. They have to do it before the event sets up, but that only leans into the theory that Konami was actually just harvesting data for day 1 and allowing us to watch day 2 when they already had all the information that they needed. But as you already know, big dog, I got you. Not only did I do a ton of research on the event and talk to some of the players that went there, I had an experience of my own, and I can give you some insight on some of the top cards being played, as well as some cards that aren't so good. And easily, one of the best cards in the game right now would be Anti-Spell Fragrance over Dimensional Barrier. I'll talk about Dimensional Barrier a little bit later, but the biggest thing about Anti-Spell Fragrance is that you can flip it face up and completely shut down so many Yu-Gi-Oh decks. The card is a complete monster and is ironically a counter to a lot of the counters that people have been playing for your counter. Wait, what? Basically what I'm saying is that a lot of players have been playing Crossout Detonator not only to stop hand interruptions, but to stop cards like Dimensional Barrier. I personally like this little psych out because nobody is citing Crossout Detonator, the hand traps that they're weakened to, Dimensional Barrier, and Anti-Spell Fragrance, and a lot of times against combo decks, Anti-Spell Fragrance really hinders them. Also, to make things a little bit more interesting, Triple Tactics Thrust and Triple Tactics Talents are still very powerful Yu-Gi-Oh cards in the game, and often they're cited. Hold on, you know I gotta do the thing. Anti-Spell Fragrance was not only a perfect counter to combo decks, it was a perfect counter to a lot of players' sideboards, and that's why so many players used it. Speaking of the Triple Tactics cards, those were absolute units throughout the entire event. Their versatility of being able to steal an opponent's monster, draw 2 cards, or look at your opponent's hand was not unnoticed, especially since there are a ton of hand traps being used in the game, or being able to search any normal spell or trap card from your deck to your hand. We saw a lot of players using cards like Change of Heart, Harpy's Feather Duster, and other really powerful normal spell cards to be able to break boards. I think going forward that those are going to be really important cards, especially since hand traps are still in full effect. Now personally, I think Yu-Gi-Oh is an exceptionally healthy when there is actually counters to counters that make sense. Take for example your opponent building a board, which is something that's been done since the dawn of Yu-Gi-Oh, can be easily countered not only by hand interruptions, but also by those powerful spell cards that I just mentioned. But the crazy thing is that you can actually reverse engineer it. You can even sometimes use those powerful hand interruptions to stop those powerful spell effects, and you can even use those spell effects to sometimes break a board. Also, consequently, you can build a board that may not be as powerful, but still have those hand interruptions to be able to stop your opponent from building a board. It's like some weird triangle where all of the things can be countered by one another, and I think that that is perfectly healthy in the game. With that being said, there's a plethora of powerful hand effects that you can be using to stop your opponent. I think you may be surprised by some of these cards being really strong and also shocked by some of the cards that are not so good. Some of the best cards that I've noticed probably in order would be Infinite Impermanence, Ash Blossom, and Joyous Spring. There's no real shock there, but to some people it may be Nibiru the Primal Being, which can be considered as a boom or bust Yu-Gi-Oh card. It's not really good on its own sometimes when your opponent can insulate their combos, but it's incredibly good if you have another hand interruption to force your opponent to stop the first card, and then the Nibiru goes through. There's also Ghost Runner and Moonlit Chill, one of the only hand interrupts that can interrupt monster effects during any phase, and Effect Failure, which is a light monster monster, which comes up for some strategies. Every single one of those cards made a huge impact throughout the event, and I think that those are some of the better hand interruptions that you can be using. Now on to the bad. You probably noticed that I omitted Droll and Lockbird, and that's simply because it's not as good as a lot of people think it is. And the event pretty much proved that Droll and Lockbird can be an amazing card against certain matchups, but is extremely bad against the majority of Yu-Gi-Oh decks, and sometimes Yu-Gi-Oh strategies can even play under Droll and Lockbird, which makes it feel even worse. And I know personally, I made the mistake of playing Droll and Lockbird in the main deck. Yeah, I made that mistake. And it's actually 100% my fault. I should have been caught up on my Squiddios. He actually made a video explaining in detail why Droll is not a great card, at least to be playing inside of your main deck. So make sure you check out my boy Squiddy for good content. That boy know what he's talking about. Now bringing it back full circle, another card that hasn't actually been as good as players would hope would be Dimensional Barrier. Barrier seems like an extremely powerful card, but in a format where there are so many diverse strategies, it's not as good, especially considering that the decks that are weak to this are now citing Crossout Designator to be able to stop it. And this really only leads into my theory. I personally think that any given time where we don't have floodgate cards that are ruining the game, cards like Droll and Lockbird and Dimensional Barrier being not so great cards because there's so much diversity, we're in a really healthy format. Now, ironically, I'm not saying that those cards are completely terrible, but the fact that they're not must-play shoe-ins in every single Yu-Gi-Oh build is definitely a W from my book. And I think it further goes to prove that if you look at the top 8, which is technically the top 24 decks out of the entire event, Unchained just so happened to have dominated with 34%. Droll and Lockbird and Dimensional Barrier are cards that are completely terrible against that matchup. Now this obviously means a couple of things. One, your boy was right about Unchained. You remember when I said Unchained was the best deck in Yu-Gi-Oh? I was like, Callie, you're wrong! Well, I'm right, get used to it. Unchained getting support from Duelist Nexus in dominating the top tables with taking over triple of the second best deck, which was Kashtira and Pearly. It's crazy how instead of just releasing a Forbidden List, Konami could just drop an actually good Yu-Gi-Oh set, which changes the entire format. Now, I would say that Unchained did catch a lot of players off guard. A lot of the cards that I previously mentioned don't necessarily trade well, and players will adjust accordingly. With that being said, I think cards like Fantastical Dragon Phantasmate and Skullmeister are now very good hand traps in the game. Fantastical Dragon Phantasmate can summon itself to give you tons of advantage and also play around the Unchained Link monsters like Solar Rage and Soul of Anguish, as well as Abomination. And Skullmeister can be a solid point of interruption to stop those Unchained trap cards and monsters from triggering in the graveyard, as well as preventing Yama from using it to fact. Then there's also the aforementioned cards like Change Your Heart and Triple Tactics Talents to take your opponent's Wave King Caesar to not only prevent them from using it on you, to also prevent them from summoning monsters. Unchained isn't without its weaknesses, and since I'm a salty Yu-Gi-Oh player, I'm gonna be giving them all to you because I ain't get the top with Unchained. Bro, I played against all of my counters. I was Vegas prepared. All of my counters just happen to be players better than me. I don't play against players better than me, I top. But because I don't think that there was enough preparedness for players in Unchained, when you move on to the top 4 breakdown, Unchained takes 50% of the top cut. I also want to give a shout out to Carlancho's store for providing these images. You guys are too strong while I'm here. But it's kind of crazy how Unchained is genuinely the best deck in Yu-Gi-Oh without a ban list being out. This is a 3v3, so for the lack of a better word, you can get carried a little bit in case you do lose your matchup, but I think that is a pretty strong indignation that the Yu-Gi-Oh meta is fairly balanced, and once players figure out how to beat Unchained, that number will drop down too. Now, I want to give a congratulations to Team Better Have It, as they did win YCS Brazil, playing some of the best decks that I think are going to carry on to the next format, as long as Konami doesn't address dragons. But overall, you really can't hate the deck diversity that was presented inside of the format, and I think it's going to be an indication if Konami does handle the Forbidden List correctly, that that's what we have to come. And that's when I found out about this huge meta shift regarding the biggest event of the season. I want you guys to let me know if there was something that I missed or something that you found out that I may not have known about. Let me know, big dog, and let us all know, because we're always trying to get better and win that next event. Of course, big dog, if you're trying to see more amazing content, you already know what to do. Be sure to check out these other videos, and I'll catch you on the next one.